So we're getting ready here to do a FreeNAS build. I have here 6 Western Digital Red NAS drives, the 6 terabyte variety, 6 of those. I have 32 gigs of RAM, Gigabyte Motherboard, and an AMD FX processor, and an EVGA power supply. Now all this is going into a custom FreeNAS build for a client that has some large storage needs, and we're going to kind of walk you through the process. Now some of you are already going to start the debate, and you can find plenty of articles on this. I go, but Tom, I think that's not ECC memory. You are correct, it is not ECC memory. I have been using non-ECC for a long time. There is plenty of information, including from the guys from the FreeNAS project and from other people in the industry, that you do not have to use ECC memory. Also, this is going to be running FreeNAS, which is based on ZFS FreeBSD, so we'll be covering some of that, how we configure it, how we set it up, and how we integrate it into their network. And so I'm going to give you the whole build process here, and then some of the software setup process, kind of walk you through building a nice large RAID array to store all your stuff, because we're producing data at just an amazing amount now. And if you don't have it stored somewhere redundantly, even if it's just on a local server, you do not have a proper backup. And the problem is just storing in the cloud can be rather difficult. So even for this client, this server, once it's built, we're taking their older array server, which is going to be a Readygear, the Netgear NAS box, and we're going to be upgrading that because we're going to have the files copying back and forth between them, so they have 2 copies of all the data on site, and then their third backup is going to be off site. Now the problem with that is it's downtime. So in worst case scenario, if one of these servers goes down, we're going to be able to pull the backup. Ideally, this is going to be their primary server. We'll have a local copy to backup. In the event that both go down, we have a cloud backup. The downside of that is pulling that much data takes a little while, so it'll either be mailing back a hard drive, but everything's just creating layers of redundancy. And that's kind of what this project is about in terms of for the client. In terms of for you guys, this is about building and everything for a FreeNAS box. So if you want to build one at home, you want to build one for your company, this will get you started and kind of get you an idea of how to work with FreeNAS. So let's get started. So the box has been built. It's assembled, it's tested, and it works really well. So we went with a RAID Z2 with all these 6 terabyte hard drives. We went with the, as I showed at the beginning, the Western Digital Red NAS drives. They're really low wattage, and letting this thing run for 24 hours and dumping over a terabyte of half of data, deleting it, and putting it back on there a couple times to really make sure there wasn't any problems, it didn't have any issues. This worked really well. The drives really never got above about 34, 35 at their hottest under full load. Now that's important. Now these docks right here, and that's why I got this here from Kingwin, this dock system is really cool. It's compatible with SAS and SATA, and these are just a pretty slick system. So it almost reminds me of a Nintendo cartridge when you pull these in and out, and I'll show you that in a second here. We went with the Gigabyte Motherboard, and this is one of their ultra durable motherboards. Now this system is really for storage for our client. It's about having readily available archival videos that they have. They do civil engineering work, so they have lots of things they need to access, lots of little files, pictures when they had things taken apart like sewer systems or other large-scale city projects. So all that documentation, if there's an emergency, they need to be able to get to it pretty easily, and they wanted to have something like, online all the time. They can't archive it and try to pull it off somewhere else. And that's where this system comes in. So all 6 drives, as I said, 36 terabytes worth of drives. When you put that in a RAID Z2 configuration, you come down to about 22 terabytes of usable drive space on FreeNAS. And the reason it was Z2 is you have an issue with RAID where, okay, I have at least 1 redundant drive. It doesn't seem statistically likely 2 drives to fail, except this is the part you have to think about. If 1 drive fails, you have to rebuild it off of the data on the other drives. The stress of the rebuild could cause another drive to fail, and then the whole RAID array collapses at that point. RAID Z2, it requires 2 drives to fail before the RAID array collapses. So while one's being rebuilt, if another one were to fail, there's enough data put there. Now you can go even further with RAID Z3 and it reduces the amount of usable, but we didn't need to go all the way there. RAID Z2, 2 drive failures, and we're good. We can survive that on here.
Now the processor we went with is the AMD FX 8320E. That's the low wattage model because it just doesn't need a lot of horsepower. Now we did go with 32 gigs of RAM, and the reason for that is with the RAM you want enough RAM. Roughly you have a gigabyte of RAM for each terabyte of hard drive space, and that it's a rough rule of thumb. You can get away with it being a little bit lower, but what it creates is it loads all the tables in FreeNAS, the entirety of the drive, and has it more accessible. So it's not just like caching, but it's more of, hey, here's an index of where all the things are, and you start talking about 50, 60,000 files on the drive. You want good, fast access to that, and FreeNAS can facilitate that. So it will suck up as much RAM as needed. When you first turn it on, there's really nothing going on. You'll see the RAM usage is low. As soon as you start copying files to it or from it, it starts rising right up, and it'll just eat up all the memory available to it. The FreeNAS uses ZFS. ZFS is a COW, copy on write file system, or COW as they call it. That is really, really fault tolerant. And the way ZFS is designed, it's just an amazing system. Matter of fact, I'm going to plug Michael Lucas. I've met the guy, I've been to his talks. He wrote the book, matter of fact, 2 books on how ZFS works. Great in-depth, you can learn about the resilient nature of the ZFS file system. And I've even talked to engineers that worked at Ubuntu, and they're like, they like it. Some of their back-end stuff does run on it because you can literally just shut it off. Like, they don't have to worry about it write committing. They can actually pull them out and just say, boom. And it's amazing. It recovers perfectly fine. We've had power failures at other places in our own ZFS, and I've never once had it have a problem. And we've replaced drives and rebuilt the RAID arrays in them. It's just, can't say enough good things about it. And that's really what matters, is having a really good reliability on this. Now, it's also with FreeNAS, if you wanted to build something high performance, and maybe sometime I'll get around to building one like this, you can set SSDs in front of these, because these are only 5400 RPM drives. You can put, and I highly recommend putting these in a RAID array, you can put basically caching drives in front of the other drives, so that gives it a high speed spot to write. And you can actually build a separate array of them, and those ones you would have that would write back there. Now the risk, of course, would be if in the power failure and your cache drives haven't flushed out, that's also why you would want them to be RAID. But those are real specific high-end configurations. For this one, like I said, we just went with those in the storage. Now the other thing we did, and I'm going to show you in the back here, is we went with dual USB. So these USB thumb drives, when you install them, when you're running through the install, you select both of the thumb drives for the install, and then automatically goes, oh, okay, you must want these in a mirror. And it mirrors them for you. So I can remove either one of them and it will still boot. Now if one of them fails, same thing, it still boots up. Now I always recommend backup and download the configuration file, which FreeNAS is really easy to set back up. So if we ever had a problem, we could just replace the board. It doesn't care. It's not particular about hardware like Windows is. You can take the drives out. As long as you have all the drives, or at least enough of them, you can rebuild the pool in another FreeNAS machine, and it'll bring them all back in. But also not having to worry about the thumb drives. If one goes bad, alert comes up. It says, hey, I can't find one of them. We've tested this. It boots with either one individually, but then it tells you that there's a resyncing issue, but then you plug them both back in and it resyncs them, and away you go. So it works really well for having that for redundancy. And they're so inexpensive. I mean, these things are $10 a piece. So for $10 extra, you can have redundant rated, mirrored RAID 1 thumb drives in there. So let's get into the dock and kind of show you how that works too. Now, they have this tiny little key, and I know it's really small, and it allows you to lock the drives so you can keep people from pulling it out. But it's just mostly to keep you from accidentally ejecting the drive. It doesn't really provide a lot of security on there. So it's twist, turn this way. I bet you could probably put a pair of pliers and just, put it in. There's nothing real special about it. So that comes there. Now the drives themselves slide out, and it's really slick. Now when you set them here, you feel like I should be able to push it in, but you don't have to. You slowly close the dock and they snap in. Now, I also feel like if there's a problem with the drive, you can blow on it like a Nintendo cartridge, because that's what it feels like to me when it goes in and out. It's like, hey, look, Nintendo cartridge. But this dock is nice. I mean, this is
completely toolless.
Really, it's toolless. I can take the drives in and out. I can just slide the drive out here.
For another one, and
yeah, you open a box and away you go. Now, the way we number the drives, to keep it simple, there's 6 SATA ports, and they referred to as ADA 0 through ADA 5. So we just started at 0 at the top, put the 5 at the bottom, and we know which one. So if FreeNAS identifies a drive as bad, we know exactly which one it is, and we can find it in the dock. Now, these docks are hot swappable as well, and you can do that without restarting the machine. Now, another neat thing about the way FreeNAS works is this doesn't matter. We can take the drives, and we're going to do a little rearrangement here, shuffle them, and FreeNAS just goes, okay. They're all part of the same array, so it doesn't have any issues. It's not even an error when it comes up with this. It finds all the partitions, it has the configuration file, so swapping the drives, no big deal. And if you got to swap one out, as long as it's the same equivalent size, you can add it right back in the pool, it rebuilds. Now, the only time you're going to have a problem with that if you go with a drive smaller, not going to rebuild, and I highly recommend going with all the same drives. Now, another consideration with FreeNAS, when you're ordering these drives, don't order them from all the same vendor at the same time. The problem you run into is, let's say there was a bad batch of drives and vendors, large scale, Newegg, Amazon, wherever you're getting them from, Micro Center, they order batches at a time. So if you have an entire large batch of drives and they were all bad, that vendor may have an entire pile of them all bad. But when you order from different vendors and different pools, you'll find that the drives take they're different, slightly different build dates. So statistically, and this is just a guessing game, of course, statistically less likely to fail. So maybe on a certain day they had a bad run, but that run went to one company and another run that was good went to another company from a different day. And by mixing them up from different vendors, unfortunately you don't always get the best price, but with all that price matching, we were able to get a good deal. And now we have a variety of manufacture dates on the drive. Speaking of which, something we found interesting when looking at the drives, even with getting from different vendors, most of these drives were, let's see, 2016 November, and I think some of them were in October. So these kind of sit around for a little while because this is June, and like we literally, they just came in the other day. So this is June 2017. So these drives have been sitting around for 4 or 5 months. So we've been noticing that in some of the drives. We think just some of the larger ones, like these 6 terabyte, they take a little while before they, ship them out. So that was kind of it for the build. I can go in briefly cover the software and just kind of show you how you configure the RAID in there. It's pretty straightforward. I've done, I think, some videos on this before, but I'll give you the rundown of it real quick and show you how you set up the array for RAID Z2. It's really easy. All right, so I'm in Virtualbox, and the reason for that is to show you the install and do a clean, clear screen capture. We're going to just run through the installer process here. It's exactly the same on the desktop. The only thing different we did on the desktop was we copied it to a USB drive to install it to the dual USB drives. We could have just as easily ripped the ISO into a CD and booted off a CD and did it. Either way works. VirtualBox doesn't support USB bootables, so we just took the ISO and attached the ISO to one of the controllers. And these are my FreeNAS boot 1, boot 2, and we're going to show you how to set up a RAID during install. I like to make my installs really clean, and capturing it this way looks way better than a camera over my shoulder and you trying to read what's on the screen. But once I go through the install, then we'll jump over to the physical actual build, and I'll walk you through how to set up the RAID array inside of there, because that's all done through the web interface. So let's get started. Now, you never really want to install FreeNAS other than for testing purposes inside of a virtual machine like this. It really wants direct access to the hardware. Just a little side note there for people wondering if, hey, should I run this in a virtualized environment? Not the most ideal. You want FreeNAS to have full direct access. Now, this is actually nice because you can install or upgrade, reboot system, shut down. This is your standard menu installer, but this is also for recovering a FreeNAS. Never had to do it. I've never had one crash so bad that I couldn't just do this, but select one or more drives where FreeNAS should be installed. Use the arrow keys. Now, this is what I was talking about to select RAID. There's no real configuration you need to do. If you select 2 devices, those devices become the rated devices. As simple as that. Now, they're all labeled in here, ADA0 and ADA1. I believe in FreeNAS, they're DA0 and DA1, which that is referring to the USBs. In this case, because they're all connected to the PCI bus. Now, you can install FreeNAS to a hard drive, but why would you? That's kind of a waste of a hard drive. You could use an older hard drive because you have it, but then that's not as reliable. Go spend a few dollars on a USB and get 2 of them because, well, we got these on sale for $6 each. It just makes a lot more sense. This will cause all 88 to be erased. It's just letting you know. Yep. We get to set a password. I love when companies don't have default passwords on things on installs because, well, people go, I'll just leave it at default, and no, that's a problem. And then someone hacks you later because you left everything at default. You have to use a password. You can boot via UniFi or BIOS depending on the motherboard setup. I'm going to do BIOS. I don't think Virtualbox does UniFi very well. Not real sure on that. Never really tried. Now it's going to run through the installer, and I'll fast forward through all this. And that's it, completed. It installs relatively fast. We're going to shut down so we can remove the CD. And then you reboot FreeNAS. Just going to do normal boot up. I didn't feel like waiting for the seconds to count down. And now that's it. So from here, you can configure the network interfaces if you need to, set it as static and things like that. Set up default routes, VLAN interface, link aggregation. You can start getting into all the features here, or do a reset the root password because somehow you forgot what you set it to, or just go right to the HTTP, the address, and get started with FreeNAS. So it's kind of a nice thing is it tells you what IP address it got, so you don't got to go digging for it. But pretty much after this, if you remembered the password you set, you can simply go to the IP address, log in as root and the password you set, and get started with FreeNAS. And that's where we're going to start now, is we're actually go into the production machine and show you how we have it configured. Now, before we switch over to the production machine, now that we've run through the install, I'm going to show you what it looks like to run the wizard. Now, I don't usually run it, but if you're just getting started, it's a quick way to get a couple shares enabled in FreeNAS. So we'll go ahead and set it to Detroit. Next. Now, pool name, we'll call it Test Tank. Now, automatic, pick reasonable defaults, good reliability under virtualization, backups, media RAID Z1, or logs RAID 0, which means just put all of them together. Now, the wizard does a pretty good job. I believe automatically it will probably pick a standard RAID Z2 for this one, or a RAID Z1 for medium reliability and more storage. Now, this is all about how many drives out of the pool can fail before there's a problem. So we'll go ahead and just hit next and yes, and just show you what the wizard does. We're skipping Active Directory for this. We'll call share name is our share test. We're going to hit allow guest. Ownership, if I added users, we'll say they can have all the permissions, and add. Next. Console messages. I do like this on. This is a show them in the footer down here. So we'll go ahead and we're not going to set up email right now. Confirm. And with that, it created the test tank, the share test, and it's already turned on things like if you go to services, it already turned on SMB. It also creates a Windows share with the same name. All right, so we're on the production machine and it's all set up and configured. So the first thing we want to do is switch it to HTTPS. I don't care if it's your own internal network, you feel it's a trusted network, I really recommend encrypting everything. Just have it, be in the habit of doing it. It's a good security habit. We're over here to a CA. We have to create an internal CA, so it's going to give us, the error, but no big deal there. We'll run through it real quick. All right, so now we have an internal CA. Now we can go create a certificate. Create internal cert. All right, now we have our own internal certificate. We can go back over here, HTTPS, and choose internal cert, hit save. All right, so now we have our, of course, error because it's an internally sound certificate, but, like I said, security, that's important. So having a certain error keeps from passing everything through clear text. So let's go to the boot, and this is what I was talking about, how you can see the default install, reboot, boot volume condition healthy. Now, this is where you'll get an error if you have a problem, like say, when I showed there was 2 thumb drives in this, it keeps the status on there and it'll do a little alert and tell you the status of these. Go to advanced. The things I like to turn on is, you can turn off, actually. By default, it's on this console menu. So if you didn't want anyone to walk up to the machine, generally when we're putting these machines in, there's no keyboard or mouse attached to them, only in emergency cases. Show console messages in the footer. I like this feature quite a bit. It's just going to put everything at the bottom there. Enable auto tune. This is a cool little feature, not the auto tune music, but what it does is it's going to have all the system tunables, which are not populated by default. It'll choose all the optimal configurations for this. Now, I've never had a problem with it. I'm always turning it on, all the system tunables. But if you do have problems, turn that off. There's not much it found in here. It says generated by auto tune. I can't remember if it generates a couple more on reboot or not. I always just turn it on in case there's anything I need to do or it needs to do in there. Updates, by default, already checked for being able to check there. Leave it at the stable. Don't accidentally choose this because if you choose a higher up, it may not roll back properly. Matter of fact, very likely it won't. So there's kind of the basics for getting it set up. Now let's get to the important part, the storage array. So there's nothing in here. Nothing in the volume manager. And you can see some disks. Oh, no entries because we have none set up yet. So we better, we can import a volume if you were doing this on a load and bringing in other ones, or we can go to the volume manager and let's set this up. So here's our 6 drives. And this is the system right here where you can simply choose how you want the drives to be laid out. So if we go to RAID Z3, we have a capacity of only 16 terabytes. RAID Z would give us 27 terabytes, but if any one drive failed, that's it. Second drive fails, you're lost. RAID Z2 gives us the 21.82 terabytes. So we'll actually just call this drive uncreatively 21 terabytes. All right, there's an encryption option. They give you a warning. Please read this. You must back up the key. If you do not back up the key and your thumb drives fail, you are not getting back whatever's on that volume. Now, I highly recommend encrypting the volumes. And one of the real reasons you encrypt it, it's not, just because you have personal stuff on there, but a lot of people do. But it's if you send those drives back, where's the data going? Now, I know, granted, if one drive fails, they've only got enough data to maybe reassemble something, but it's not worth the risk. This way, if a drive fails and you send it back, there's no worry. The drive's encrypted, and without that key, they're not getting it. So I highly recommend encryption, but we're going to show you how to back it up. I highly recommend backing up the encryption key. It's not hard to do. But please store it in a safe place, store it offline, keep it somewhere, wherever you need to keep it to make sure that, if something happens, you can get those drives back up and running. If not, you lose the key, that's it. All right. Now that the volume's created, these are just some of the console notifications that show up. Some of these show up on the console itself as well whenever you create a volume. So if there's any errors, you can look for them in here. This is also why I like the console being really accessible. You just click this at the bottom, and away you go. So we can see it's 21 terabytes, the RAID Z2 configuration. So they're all in one large pool. Now, design a FreeNAS. I can't just add to this pool. I can't just say, let me throw another drive in and rebuild it. It'll just add more magically. There are a couple different RAID systems out there I've seen that have different options like that. I think Drobo has some specialized RAID system. I'm very confident in the ZFS file system. I'm very confident in how it handles everything. And so I'm fine with the fact that I can't expand it. Generally, when I build these, I build out all the drives I'm going to put into a system, and it's going to run for years until it's time to replace or upgrade that system. Now, you can add, this is just one set. If you have like 3 more, and this is what we did in our machine, we put in the 4 drives. Later, we added a few more. We have more expansion, or you can get a card, like a PCIe card, and add more drives. So you can add another volume. You just can't change the existing volume. But easy solution, copy everything from the original volume to the new one, then remove it, and now you can have the same system. Later on, swap out bigger hard drives to it. Now, this also is where you would replace a disk, edit a disk, take a disk out of the pool. Pretty straightforward. If you had an extra disk, you'll actually see an error on it, it would be offline. You hit replace, and you would choose from the free pool. I've got a separate video on how to swap out one of the drives if they go bad. So back over here to storage. Now, the next thing we're going to do here is, this is where we start setting up each one of the volumes. Now, the way this company's set up, they have just one big shared drive for the engineering team, and that's who's going to be doing this. So we'll just create one data set. Now, we don't want to create a Z-file that's different and the kind of special use, which I won't get into. For the most part, you just want to be able to create data sets, and we'll just call it shared. drive, the shared drive, and we're going to go ahead and add the data set. Now, not going to be included in this video. I'll do this as a separate video altogether. They're going to be doing this with Active Directory integration. So I'll do a whole separate video because I think it might be worthy of just a separate video. And plus, I don't have an Active Directory to hook it up to. It's still at my office and testing here. Part of the testing we do, and this is important to us because you don't realize there's problems until you start loading data. I don't want to load the customer data and then learn there's a problem. So we load test these and just find all kinds of stuff to put on there. I've actually already went through one load test, and then we actually just reset it again for the video to make sure everything was good on this. But load testing the machine is really, really important. So we dumped about 4 terabytes of data over to this drive, destroyed it, as in detached the array and reset it, then went and did it again. And did it again. So it's went through several, since we built it, it's actually now been through a couple load tests. And there was an error here. We think we had a SATA cable loose. We unplugged it, plugged it back in. The error went away. I did do some research, and someone else had pointed out an error with these drives, but they're an error a day. It was one CRC error. So, but we still keep an eye on everything to make sure it works. All the disks still show healthy and no issues at all. All right, so we have the drive set up, they're configured, and I had brought up making sure that you back everything up. This is where you can get the keys. Now you can rekey it, and I think every time you add a drive to the pool, I think it automatically wants to rekey, if I'm not mistaken. I did another video on that. But what we're going to do right now is download the key, because the key itself is not stored in the backup config. So you have the backup config, but you want to get this geli.key file. It's really important to keep this .key file. There's really not much in this file either. It's a very small little file. Keep it for the client because it will save you if ever anything happens. This GELI key is stored within the USB drives. If for some reason, even though they're mirrored, they fry, the USB bus fries, you're like, oh, cool, I'm just going to rebuild the box and import the volume. You won't import the volume at all if you don't have that key, even if you have the backup config. So if we go here to System, General, and we save the config here, that key is not in here. Just all the settings for FreeNAS are in here. So you could end up in a lot of trouble. You're like, oh, I don't have it. Well, you have 21 terabytes of encrypted information at that point if you didn't have it. So just a side note, make sure you back up that key and a backup of this. Store them in a safe place. Once you have this thing up and running, you go, okay, I got it configured and I'm going to put my important things on it. Do that configuration on there. Maybe another time I'll get in more in depth if there's some interest in how to set up the shares and things like that. It's not too hard to do, but thanks for watching. If you like the content here, like and subscribe. If you have questions about the FreeNAS build, reach out to me and we'll cover any more questions or give you a more in-depth video on certain things on FreeNAS. Thanks for watching.